We are back. And where do we even begin? The situation in the Middle East has taken another dramatic turn. And folks, I am not going to sugarcoat this for you. The diplomatic window that many hoped would open appears to be slamming shut faster than you can say nuclear negotiations. Let me bring you up to speed on what has happened over the past 72 hours, because the developments are nothing short of alarming. The much-discussed back-channel talks between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran, which were tentatively scheduled to begin this Friday in Istanbul, are now in serious jeopardy. In fact, they may already be dead in the water before they even started. But here's what makes this situation particularly concerning. It's not just that the talks might not happen. It's the manner in which they unraveled that should set off alarm bells in capitals around the world. Iranian state media, which had initially reported with considerable fanfare that negotiations would commence on Friday, has now deleted that report from their archives. This is not a minor editing error or a routine correction. This is a deliberate erasure, and it speaks volumes about the internal dynamics within the theocratic regime in Tehran. Now, the Americans never formally confirmed this Friday timeline. From the outset, the White House was careful to say that discussions were being arranged, that preparation was underway, but no specific date was ever nailed down. That caution has proven prescient, because now we're looking at a situation where the Iranian side has essentially walked back its own announcement. What changed? The answer lies in the hardline stance taken by the highest levels of the Iranian regime, specifically from the office of the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. While the more diplomatic elements of the Iranian government had been signaling a willingness to engage, to talk, to perhaps find some common ground, the IRGC and their political masters in the Supreme Leader's office had other ideas. And make no mistake about this, when we talk about the Islamic Republic of Iran, we are not talking about a traditional nation-state with a civilian government that sets foreign policy. We are talking about a hybrid regime where the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, operates as a state within a state, answerable only to the Supreme Leader. The elected officials, the president, the foreign minister, they are essentially figureheads, actors in a theatrical production designed to give the international community the illusion of normalcy. The evidence of this reality came crashing down on Monday when Ali Shamkhani, the senior advisor to the Supreme Leader who serves as the top military strategist for the regime, went on Lebanese television and delivered what can only be described as a declaration of war by other means. Let me break down exactly what Shamkhani said, because each point is significant and each point represents a categorical rejection of American demands. First, and perhaps most critically, Shamkhani declared that enriched uranium will not be transferred out of Iran under any circumstances. This directly contradicts one of the primary American conditions for any meaningful negotiation. President Trump had reportedly demanded that Iran part with its enriched uranium stockpile as a show of good faith, as a verifiable first step toward denuclearization. The answer from Tehran was an unequivocal no. Second, and this is where the rhetoric takes a genuinely threatening turn, Shamkhani warned that if the United States attacks Iran, the regime will strike Israel. Now, this might seem like boilerplate anti-Israeli rhetoric from a regime that has made death to Israel a centerpiece of its ideological identity for nearly 5 decades. But the context matters here. This was not a generic threat. This was a specific promise of retaliation delivered at a moment when military action was being actively discussed in Washington. Third, and this is where the door to meaningful negotiation effectively closes, Shamkhani stated that Iran will not negotiate on any non-nuclear issues. This means no discussion of the ballistic missile program that the regime has spent decades developing. No discussion of the network of proxy forces that extend Iranian influence from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq. No discussion of the support for terrorist organizations that has destabilized the entire Middle East region. In other words, Iran wants to talk about nuclear issues, but only on its own terms, and only to the extent that those terms preserve its ability to continue pursuing a nuclear weapons capability. Every other aspect of its military and paramilitary apparatus is off the table. Fourth, and this should send chills down the spine of anyone following this story, Shamkhani declared that the patience shown by Iran during what he called the 12-day war will not be repeated. Now, this is a fascinating choice of words because most outside observers would characterize those 12 days very differently. During the recent conflict, Iran was pummeled by Israeli airstrikes that took out critical air defense systems, command facilities, and military infrastructure. The regime's response was notably restrained, limited mostly to symbolic missile barrages that caused minimal damage. But according to Shamkhani, that restraint was a one-time thing. His implication was clear: if war comes again, Iran will not hold back. And in the very next breath, he suggested that this time, Iran might not wait for the Americans to strike first. Let me quote him directly. "It is possible that the one who starts this war will not be the United States." Think about what that means. The official position of a regime that has been designated a state sponsor of terrorism, that has American blood on its hands from the kidnapping and murder of American citizens, that has spent 47 years chanting "Death to America" at every Friday prayer, is now saying that they might be the ones to start the next war. If this sounds like an unexpected escalation, let me provide some context. Shamkhani is not some rogue official speaking out of turn. He is the chief strategist of the IRGC, the architect of Iran's regional military strategy, and a man who speaks directly for the supreme leader. When he makes threats, he is conveying the official position of the regime. But here's the thing, this isn't actually new behavior. The Islamic Republic has been at war with the United States since 1979. They attacked the American embassy in Tehran. They held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days. They have killed American soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan through their proxy forces. They have plotted assassination attempts on American soil. The only thing that has changed is the intensity and the transparency of the threats. There's another aspect of Shamkhani's threats that deserves our attention because it reveals something important about how the Iranians perceive their strategic position. He specifically mentioned Azerbaijan, referring to it in a manner that suggested it could be a target if conflict erupts. Now, for those who might be wondering why Azerbaijan matters in this context, let me explain. Azerbaijan shares a lengthy border with Iran to the south, and it has emerged as a critical strategic partner for both the United States and Israel in recent years. American special forces have been conducting training exercises in Azerbaijan, and the country has allowed the United States to use its airspace and facilities for intelligence gathering operations. When Shamkhani threatened Azerbaijan, he was sending a message to Washington that Iran knows where American assets are positioned in the region, and that those assets could be targeted in any future conflict. It was both a warning and a threat, designed to make the United States think twice about its military posture. This is not idle posturing. The Iranians have demonstrated repeatedly that they are willing to carry out threats when it comes to attacking targets they perceive as hostile. The missile attack on the American base in Erbil, the drone attacks on American personnel in Jordan, the strikes on shipping in the Persian Gulf, all of these were carried out despite Iran's official rhetoric about wanting to avoid conflict. And speaking of preparations for conflict, let me turn now to what Israel is doing, because the picture that emerges is one of a country that is taking the threat of war very, very seriously. According to reports from Israel's Haaretz newspaper, the Israeli government has placed private ambulance services on nationwide standby for the next 5 months. This is not a routine emergency preparedness measure. This is a calculated response to a specific threat assessment, and the duration of the standby order tells us something important. Israel is not expecting this crisis to resolve itself quickly. The private ambulances would supplement the work of Magen David Adom, Israel's national emergency medical service, in the event of a mass casualty scenario. The health ministry has established protocols for a rapid transition to emergency mode at hospitals across the country. This is the kind of preparation you undertake when you're expecting the worst. Israeli military forces have been placed on elevated alert status, reservists have been called up, and the country has accelerated its preparedness for a potential American-led strike operation. According to reports, Israeli military preparations related to a potential American operation have been completed, which suggests that the two allies are coordinating closely on potential contingencies. Now, why does this matter? Because Israel is the primary target in Iranian military planning. The regime in Tehran has invested decades and billions of dollars in developing the capability to strike Israel through its proxy forces in Lebanon, through its ballistic missile program, through its network of Shia militias in Syria and Iraq. If war comes, Israel will be on the front lines, possibly within the first hours of conflict. The 5-month ambulance standby is an acknowledgement that this situation could escalate into a prolonged conflict, not a single surgical strike that resolves everything. It's also an acknowledgement that even the best air defense systems in the world cannot guarantee that Iranian missiles will be stopped. Some will get through, and Israel must be prepared for that reality. On the American side, the military buildup continues at a steady pace, and the assets being deployed send clear signals about the nature of the planning underway in Washington. The aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, along with 3 guided missile destroyers, has entered the Middle East region. This is not a routine deployment. Aircraft carriers are the most powerful military assets in the world, and their positioning is always calculated to send a message. The presence of the Abraham Lincoln in the region puts American naval power within striking distance of Iran. But there's another asset that deserves our attention because its presence is particularly significant. The E6B Mercury, an aircraft often referred to as the doomsday plane, has departed from Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma and is now operating in the region. This is not a coincidence. The E6B Mercury serves as the airborne command post for American nuclear forces. Its primary mission is to ensure that the president and the military leadership can maintain communication with the nuclear submarine fleet even if ground-based command facilities are destroyed. When these aircraft deploy to a region, it signals that nuclear command and control is being activated for potential operations. This doesn't mean nuclear war is imminent. What it does mean is that the United States is preparing for a wide range of scenarios, including operations that might require rapid escalation capability. The E6B ensures that no matter what happens on the ground or at sea, the nuclear chain of command remains intact and functional. Additional transport aircraft have been crossing into the region from European bases, bringing personnel and equipment. The RCH-222 aircraft, identified by tracking enthusiasts monitoring military movements, has been observed making the journey from Europe toward Jordan, where American forces maintain a significant presence. These logistics movements are the unglamorous but essential foundation of any military operation. You don't move aircraft carriers and deploy command aircraft without also moving the personnel, the spare parts, the fuel, the ammunition, and all the other supplies needed to sustain operations far from home. The United States is setting up a logistics chain that could support an extended campaign. Now, let me turn to the messaging from the Trump administration, because this is where the psychological dimension of this confrontation becomes fascinating. President Trump has been engaging in what can only be described as a masterclass in strategic communication. He has repeatedly referred to Iran as the North Korea of the Middle East, a comparison that carries significant weight. North Korea is perhaps the most isolated, the most repressive, the most irrational regime in the world today. By comparing Iran to North Korea, Trump is signaling to the world community that he views Tehran through the same lens. A pariah state that cannot be trusted, that operates outside all international norms, and that must be contained at all costs. But Trump's messaging has also included an element of hope, or at least the appearance of hope. He has said repeatedly that he hopes a deal can be reached, that negotiations can produce a positive outcome, that bad things will only happen if no agreement is possible. This two-track approach, the carrot and the stick, is designed to put maximum pressure on the Iranian regime while leaving them an off-ramp, however narrow. The message is essentially this: we are prepared to negotiate, we would prefer a diplomatic solution, but we are also fully prepared for war, and the consequences of choosing war will be catastrophic for your regime. And then there's the Maduro comparison, delivered by Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. Let me address this directly because it's important. Nicolas Maduro, the dictator of Venezuela, once mocked the United States on international television, tauntingly saying, "Come and get me." He was referring to the American government's demand that he step down and allow democratic governance to return to Venezuela. Maduro thought he was untouchable, protected by his military, by his alliance with Russia and China, by the false belief that America would never risk the consequences of direct action. We all know what happened next. In a dramatic operation that showcased American military capabilities, special forces conducted a raid that seized control of a Venezuelan airfield, captured key regime officials, and demonstrated to the entire world that America could reach out and touch anyone, anywhere, no matter how well protected they believed themselves to be. Hegseth's point was clear. When the United States says it is going to do something, when it issues a warning, when it makes a promise, it delivers. The Iranian regime would be wise to remember this example. Now, before I continue with the analysis, I want to address some of the misinformation that has been circulating on social media and even in parts of the mainstream media, because it is doing real harm by creating false expectations and unnecessary panic. One of the most persistent pieces of fake news in recent days is the claim that Russia has directly entered the conflict on Iran's side, that Vladimir Putin has committed Russian military forces to a potential war against the United States and Israel. This is simply not true. Russia is providing indirect support to the Islamic Republic. They are selling weapons systems. They are providing diplomatic cover at the United Nations. They are engaged in the kind of gray zone warfare that has become their specialty. But direct military involvement? No. Russian combat troops are not fighting alongside the IRGC. Russian aircraft are not patrolling Iranian airspace. Russian warships are not positioning themselves in the Persian Gulf. This distinction matters because it changes the strategic calculus entirely. A conflict between the United States and Iran is one thing. A conflict that potentially draws in Russia, a nuclear-armed superpower with the ability to escalate to global proportions, is quite another. The people pushing the narrative that Russia has entered the war are either poorly informed or deliberately trying to create fear and confusion. Social media platforms reward engagement, and nothing generates engagement quite like the prospect of World War III. But this is not what is happening, and we should all be very skeptical of any report that claims otherwise. The same applies to the various rumors that American forces have already attacked Iran, that strikes are underway, that war has already begun. These reports are false. As of this broadcast, no American military action against Iranian territory has taken place. The conflict remains in a pre-hostility phase, a period of maximum tension but no actual fighting. Does this mean attacks are imminent? I cannot answer that question. What I can tell you is that the military preparations we have documented, the positioning of assets, the activation of command and control infrastructure, all of this is consistent with a force that is ready to act but has not yet received the order to do so. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about the people of Iran, because they are the forgotten victims in all of this. When we discuss the Iranian regime, when we talk about IRGC commanders and Supreme Leader fatwas and nuclear negotiations, it is easy to lose sight of the fact that there are 85 million Iranians living under this oppression, and they did not choose this government, they do not support this ideology, and they will bear the consequences of whatever conflict ensues. The Iranian people have demonstrated repeatedly that they want freedom, that they want democracy, that they want to be part of the international community rather than its pariah. The protests of 2022, the uprising of 2026, the constant trickle of brave individuals who risk everything to speak out against the regime, all of this demonstrates that the Islamic Republic does not speak for Iran. The regime is terrified of its own people. That is a fact that should not be lost on anyone watching this situation unfold. When IRGC commanders worry that American military action might weaken the regime's grip and push the people who are doing the uprising to come back into the streets, they are acknowledging a fundamental truth. The regime survives only through brutal repression, not through popular support. Think about what it means for a government to fear the reaction of its own citizens to military defeat. It means that the government understands it has no legitimacy, no mandate, no connection to the people it claims to govern. The Islamic Republic is a foreign occupation force in its own country, maintaining power through terror and violence. And on the subject of the Iranian opposition, there are some important developments to report. Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who has emerged as the most prominent figurehead for the democratic opposition, has been coordinating an international campaign to build support for regime change. According to our sources, major rallies are planned for February 14th in Munich, Los Angeles, and Toronto. These demonstrations will mark the anniversary of the 2026 uprising and send a message to the regime that the Iranian diaspora and their supporters worldwide have not forgotten. Pahlavi's team has also been conducting intensive lobbying efforts in Western capitals, working to ensure that any American action against the regime is framed as support for the Iranian people rather than as an act of aggression against a sovereign nation. This is a sophisticated political strategy that recognizes the importance of narrative in the modern age. The regime, for its part, is reportedly panicked about Pahlavi's growing influence. A leaked IRGC document obtained by Iran International reveals that the Guard Corps has developed a comprehensive media plan designed to undermine Pahlavi's reputation and discredit the opposition movement. This is a sign of desperation. When a regime resorts to counter-propaganda against an exile who has no army and no weapons, it reveals how seriously it takes the threat of internal dissent. The Iranian opposition is not a monolith. There are different factions, different ideologies, different visions for what a post-Islamic Republic Iran might look like. Reza Pahlavi represents one strand, the secular democratic opposition that looks back to the pre-1979 era as a model for what Iran could become. The Mujahideen-e-Khalq, the MEK, represents another strand, a leftist Islamist movement that has its own controversial history. But despite these divisions, there is broad agreement on one fundamental point: the Islamic Republic must go. And increasingly, the international community is coming to recognize that supporting the Iranian people in their quest for freedom is not just a moral imperative, but also a strategic necessity for regional stability. Let me step back now and assess the broader picture, because the situation we are facing is genuinely unprecedented. What we are witnessing is the collapse of a diplomatic initiative before it even began. The United States and Iran were reportedly close to initiating back-channel negotiations, a potentially significant development given the decades of hostility between the two countries. But the hardliners in Tehran, led by Khamenei and executed through Shamkhani, have rejected the American terms outright. What were those terms? According to reports, the Trump administration had demanded three things as preconditions for meaningful negotiations. First, Iran must agree to zero enrichment of uranium, essentially abandoning its nuclear program. Second, Iran must accept limits on its ballistic missile program. Third, Iran must agree to end its support for proxy forces in the region. From the perspective of American national security, these demands make perfect sense. A nuclear-armed Iran is a catastrophic scenario for the Middle East and for the world. A ballistic missile capability that can deliver nuclear warheads to any point in the region is an existential threat to Israel and America's Arab allies. A network of proxy forces that answers only to Tehran is an instrument of regional destabilization that has killed Americans and our allies. But from the perspective of the Iranian regime, these demands are existential threats. Giving up the nuclear program means surrendering the one asset that provides deterrence against American military action. Limiting the ballistic missile program means abandoning the primary means of projecting power in the region. Ending support for proxies means losing the strategic depth that allows Iran to strike Israel without directly attacking Israeli territory. This is why Shamkhani said what he said. This is why the Iranian regime cannot accept these terms, not because they are unreasonable demands, but because accepting them would begin a process that ends with the regime's collapse. The Islamic Republic has built its entire identity around resistance to the West. around the project of becoming a regional superpower, around the dream of wiping Israel off the map. You cannot ask them to abandon 47 years of ideology in exchange for a promise of sanctions relief. And that is precisely why the negotiations were doomed from the start. The gap between what America demands and what Iran can accept is not a narrow gap that can be bridged with creative diplomacy. It is a chasm that cannot be crossed. So where do we go from here? Let me offer some thoughts on the possible scenarios. The first scenario, and the one that most observers hope for, is that despite the tough talk, both sides find a way to de-escalate. Perhaps the threat of war is simply a negotiating tactic, a way of applying pressure to extract concessions. Perhaps behind the scenes, intermediaries are working to find a face-saving formula that allows both sides to step back from the brink. This is possible, but given the public statements from Tehran, it seems increasingly unlikely. The second scenario is limited military action, a strike or series of strikes designed to degrade Iran's military capabilities without triggering a broader war. This has been Israel's approach in recent years, targeting Iranian assets in Syria, Iraq, and eventually inside Iran itself. The Americans could follow a similar playbook, conducting precision strikes against nuclear facilities, missile production sites, and IRGC command centers. The hope would be that Iran, recognizing its own weakness, would absorb the strikes without responding in kind. But Shamkhani's threat to strike Israel if America attacks suggests that Iran may not accept this scenario. The regime needs to respond to any attack, not because it wants a broader war, but because its credibility depends on demonstrating that attacking Iran has consequences. And the form that response would likely take is a missile barrage against Israel, designed to overwhelm air defenses and cause maximum civilian casualties. The third scenario, and the one that everyone fears, is a broader regional war. This would involve Iranian missile strikes on Israel, Israeli counterstrikes that expand to target Iranian territory, American forces drawn in to support the allies, and potential Iranian attempts to close the Strait of Hormuz or attack American assets in the region. This is not a scenario that anyone plans for, but it is a scenario that can emerge through accident and escalation. And then there is the fourth scenario, the one that the Iranian people are hoping for: regime collapse from within. This would require a combination of external pressure and internal resistance. Military strikes that degrade the IRGC's capabilities, combined with protests and defections that undermine the regime's grip on power, could theoretically create conditions for a popular uprising that sweeps the mullahs from power. This is what Secretary Hegseth was alluding to when he referenced the Maduro operation. The goal is not necessarily to invade Iran, not to occupy a country of 85 million people, but to remove the leadership that makes Iran a threat and allow the Iranian people to determine their own future. We are living through a moment of maximum danger in the Middle East. The window for diplomacy has not completely closed, but it is narrowing rapidly. The statements from Tehran have made clear that the regime will not accept American terms, and the military preparations from Washington suggest that the administration is prepared to act if diplomacy fails. What we are witnessing is a clash between two fundamentally incompatible visions. On one side, the United States and its allies want a Middle East where nations can coexist in peace, where terrorism is defeated, and where the threat of nuclear proliferation is contained. On the other side, the Islamic Republic of Iran wants a Middle East where it is the dominant power, where Israel is destroyed, and where the revolution can spread across the region. These visions cannot be reconciled. One vision must prevail, and the other must be defeated. For the Iranian people, this moment is filled with both terror and hope. Terror at the prospect of war on their soil, hope that the regime that has oppressed them for nearly 50 years might finally be brought low. They watch the news from their homes, knowing that their country has been transformed into a potential battlefield, knowing that their government has brought this crisis upon them through its extremism and its aggression. For the American people and our allies, this moment demands clarity of purpose. We are not seeking to attack Iran as a nation. We are seeking to remove a regime that has declared war on us, that has killed our citizens, that threatens our allies, and that pursues nuclear weapons in defiance of the entire international community. For the leaders in Tehran, I have a simple message. You chose this path. You chose confrontation over cooperation. You chose isolation over integration. You chose threats over diplomacy. The world offered you a chance to join the community of nations, and you rejected it. Now you will face the consequences. This is a story that will continue to develop in the coming days and weeks. We will be monitoring the situation around the clock, bringing you the latest developments as they happen. I want to close by thanking our incredible team here at Talk Radar, the researchers, the producers, the technical staff who make this broadcast possible. And I want to thank you, our viewers, for sticking with us through what has been a truly extraordinary period in world history. The forces that are now in motion in the Middle East will shape the world for decades to come. What happens next will depend on decisions made in Washington, in Tehran, in Jerusalem, and in the streets of Iranian cities where brave men and women still dare to dream of freedom. Stay with us, stay informed, and stay engaged, because this is your world and these are your stakes. I'm Mark Stevens, and this has been Talk Radar. We'll see you in the next broadcast.